Right. So once again, warm greetings to all of you colleagues, and I welcome you to our 16th lecture session. And this is video A and in AUE 3761. So we are busy with our preparation for exams. So one of the areas that I want to focus on in today's discussion is to address the issue regarding to the concept or the principle of tests of controls. Right. Tests of controls. Why I want to address this is because in the exam, this is one of the core topics of note that you would see being tested or that you see being examined, right? So I want to emphasize about tests of controls, and I want to illustrate this, or rather complement what I'm going to be explaining from my understanding regarding to the concepts, and also explain it, of course, by complementing with what your lecturer gave as outlined in your study material. So without any further ado, the issue of test of controls, it's one that is related or subjective to what we call audit procedures. So in other words, test of controls, it's a form of an audit procedure carried out by the auditor in order to evaluate the adequacy and effectiveness of internal controls. Very important. So the reason behind test of controls, it's essentially it's an audit procedure carried out by auditors in order for them to evaluate as well as to test the adequacy and as well as the effectiveness of internal controls in an organization. Now, very important. An organization, any business organization that you can think of, right? They would carry out different forms or different types of processes. So organizations are structured in terms of different business units or business segments carrying out different forms of organizational processes. So I'm going to try and classify them in terms of what they call business cycles. Very important in terms of what? Of business cycles. So for you to understand organizational processes, because what they would give you mostly in the exams, right? Especially in the sense of a system description, it will be a form of a business cycle. All right? A form of a business cycle that they would describe in the context of an exam question. So it can be anything like a revenue and receipt cycle. Meaning to say the business would be involved in the process of either selling goods or services in order to generate revenue. Now, revenue and receipt cycle, it's a business cycle, it's a business process, a business activity that you find in an organization that is profit motivated, right? So it's either they are selling a particular product or they are selling a particular service to its consumers or customers. So that process is called revenue and receipt cycle. What you need to remember are the functions of process stages in that particular type of a cycle in order for you to effectively carry out the test of control. Okay. Thank you so much, sister. Right. So now another cycle, obviously, of note, it's apart from revenue and receipt cycle, it is the acquisitions and receipts cycle. I'm going to try and outline all of them at once here. Acquisition and receipt cycle. Then there's what we call inventory and production cycle. Then there's what we call payroll and personnel cycle. Right. Very, very important. There's also bank and finance or investments, finance and investment cycle. finance and investments cycle. Okay, but very important to note, guys, the commonly tested ones in the context of an exam, it's usually the first four, which is namely revenue receipt cycle, acquisitions and payment, not receipt cycle. Sorry, my apologies. Let me just quickly rectify this. So it's acquisitions and payment cycle, followed, of course, by inventory and production cycle, which is number 3. And lastly, payroll and personnel cycle. Those are the common ones that they love to test you a lot on in the context of an exam. Now, you need to understand one thing about these business cycles. You can find them in 2 different forms of systems, which I want you to take special attention about. You can either find them in a manual system, meaning a system which is not computer dominated, or basically a system or an environment which does not necessarily, involve a lot of computer activity. Or in other words, the process or the activity itself does not necessarily, involve a computer in its for it to be carried out or for them to achieve the objective of that particular function. So ideally, that's what we call a manual system. All right. And we find them in any one of these cycles, right? Then, but usually, and which is, in line with what we have in our world today, which is the 4th industrial revolution, you would have what we call a computerized environment or a computerized system, so to speak, so that I can make sure that it's consistent, right? So that's another type of a system that you would find even in any one of these business cycles that I've outlined for you. So for instance, when we are selling products, right, to our clients, you would discover, for instance, that as an organization, you would have a system that, clients have to follow in order for them to process or to place their orders with us. And then, of course, we process that order using a particular, a system, computerized system in order for that to be performed. And this system can either be in real time, or it can be such that the data gets processed later. Right. Now, if it's something that's happening in real time, for instance, right, you go on your Uber Eats application and you place an order to buy some food items from a particular restaurant, right? What is happening there when you enter the details of your order with that particular restaurant, and then you get to the part where you need to insert your payment details, for instance, to process that particular payment. What is happening is the system, the revenue and receipts cycle that is taking place there, it's happening in real time. Why? Everything is processed as you enter the details, right? So that's what you find in a computerized system or in a computerized environment. But in certain instances, you might find that some, it's one that, you enter the details, yes, on the system, but then the details gets processed later. You find this a lot, especially with credit applications. That's why they'll tell you, for instance, that, you need to wait for 48 hours for us to be able to give you a feedback on whether you qualify for a particular credit purchase that you might want to make with a particular store or with a particular business entity, right? But all of that, all in all, it's happening within a computerized environment. Same thing is true even when we are buying products from a third party. So that's where, of course, we find acquisitions and payment cycle coming into the picture. Inventory and production cycle happens usually when we are the ones producing goods. So if we are manufacturing any form of a physical product, that's where inventory and production cycle comes into the picture. Now, you find it in both manual system setup, and you also find it in a computerized system setup. The computerized aspect, especially with manufacturing or inventory production, happens normally with, in the inventory management system that they use at the warehouse section, all right? So when we want to, for instance, keep track of our inventory records, mostly they like business organizations, they use a computerized application or a computerized system in order for them to keep track of their stock, right? So that's very, very important. With payroll and personnel cycle, under normal circumstances, most of the activities that happen there, it's really occurring within a computerized environment. For instance, the employee file, it's accessible within a payroll, a personnel system of the organization. Same thing with the issue of payroll. If you want to access the payroll system of the organization, it will be something that is computerized, right? So it means and it follows that your knowledge, especially when dealing with computerized systems, your knowledge of what we call test data becomes important. So these are like, instances where you are carrying out test of controls using test data, but it will be called invalid test data, right? The one that they normally test you guys on, it's called invalid test data. That's where the concept of invalid test data comes in, whereby, for instance, they'll tell you if you're going to perform any test of controls on the system application that the organization is using, use or limit your test of controls to invalid test data. Such is the example that you have here, where they say if you use test of controls using test data, right, limit your answer to invalid test data, right? What do they mean? It means if you're testing information, if you are using information, right, to test the system's response, that's test data there, right? Limit your test of controls to invalid test data. It means whenever you enter the information in the different fields within the system itself, you are entering invalid information in the respective fields that within that system, and you evaluate or you observe what the system does upon attempting to process further. That's invalid test data. You'll see it with this particular example, because I really want you guys to pick it up from here before we can even get into the past exam papers themselves. Because if you can get it from your prescribed text, that's why I decided to use a question from your study guide itself, so that at least, it can help one to be able to understand the technical approach that you should use when you are, performing test of controls. Now, so without any further ado, so that was just to help you guys to, to sort of like have a perspective as to, where do we apply test of controls, and under what circumstances would we be required to perform them? In the instance of a particular business cycle, will it be just only on the manual system side of it, or perhaps it will be also incorporating the computerized system element, right? Very, very, very crucial. Now, having said that, I think now we can jump into the scenario. Or sorry, let's start by evaluating the required part. Right. Just a moment, colleague. Let's continue now. Right. So now I want us to now meticulously evaluate the required section of this particular question. And yes, another important thing that I want you to see, of course, some of it, as you go through the rest of this question, you discover the did explained it. But I just thought maybe before we get into the actual question, let me just help you guys to understand what exactly the examiner looks for when they are marking the question on the test of controls. All right. So very important. I think the issue of I've already explained to say, you see, most of the things that you find here, it's pretty much what I was trying to explain to you here, to say that when you perform test of controls, it can be either you are performing it in a manual system or a computerized environment. That's pretty much exactly what you have here, to say you formulate the test of controls to test a manual as well as an automated internal control system. Very important to note. So an automated internal control system is one whereby the controls are programmed within an application used by the organization or within a computer system that the organization is using. And notice when you formulate this test of controls, whether it's on the manual or the automated internal control system, it's very important to understand that the automated controls, they are applicable to master file amendment. Okay, no, but this is more specific or relative to the question that we're going to look at. All right. So obviously what you need to do when you look at a context of a question, you need to check, okay, so what is that aspect of the process that is computerized? Say, for instance, like, for instance, in this case, master file amendments of new customers. It means we're dealing with revenue and receipt cycle. So where do we amend the details of a customer? Obviously, it will be in the case where a customer is placing an order with us. So when they place an order, that's where they enter their details. And they are saved within their master file, right, of the organization. So for instance, especially if it's a credit purchase, right, or a credit sale that the organization is performing, they need to have like a master file containing the details of their customers in terms of maybe it's a customer number, you know, or a customer code of some sort, so that they can easily be able to trace a particular customer's details contained within the system. Very important. So now, but ideally, in all respect, right, in test of control, it should have a how, it should have a what, it should have a why. It's very important for you to understand what is the how, what is the what, and what is the why, you know, in the context of a question. So usually the how, colleagues, it's the action verb, you know, it describes the action that the auditor is going to perform in order for him or her to collect the relevant audit evidence. So it can be anything such as, for instance, inspection, right? So the how, in essence, it describes, you know, the action or the relevant test activity that the auditor wants to carry out, okay, to evaluate the control in question. So you can inspect, you can observe, the auditor can reperform, the auditor would inquire, meaning asking questions, and using invalid test data, the auditor would reperform. Very important. So when you're performing or carrying out an audit procedure relating to test data, which of course is usually invalid test data, take note that it's more of reperformance. That's why you'd notice with invalid test data, most of the procedures that you'd find, even when you go through examples in the study material, it will be more of like attempt or reperform this, you know, or re-enter or attempt to enter these details, and you know, to determine whether the system would reject processing further, something like that. You know, so essentially, with invalid test data, it's more of reperformance. I want you to take note of that. So you reperform in different ways, by either re-attempting, by re-entering, recapturing, you know, all sort of activity that describes that you are redoing the process that is being carried out in that particular function, right? So now, notice here, with inspection, we also need to know, where do we apply inspect? The word inspect, where does it apply? The word observe, where does it apply? The word reperform, where does it apply? Inquire, you know, it's so many. It's not limited to the ones that you're seeing here. I'm talking of the words describing how, or the action verbs. There are many. You know, for instance, I can compare. For instance, I can also agree. For instance, I can match, you know, I can trace certain information, etc. and etc. All of that, it's important to note that all of that information is part and parcel of your action verbs, your how part, right? So when they are marking, they are very meticulous at that. Trust me, they are very strict with that aspect, guys, right? And then now, having said that, the what part, you know, the what part is what sometimes confuses a lot of people, and sometimes people get to be very, very vague. So in order for me to help you to understand the what part is usually the source of the evidence. It's usually the source of the evidence. That's what the what part really relates to, is the source of the evidence. So a source of evidence comes in different forms. So it comes either, number one, it comes either as documents. But now, if it's a document, be specific. What document are you inspecting, for example? It also comes in terms of physical, I'll just call it physical assets of the organization. So, for example, it would be anything like, for example, inventory, inventory items. It can be in form of raw materials. It can be PPE assets, just to name a few, something of that nature, right? So that's physical assets or physical evidence, so to speak. But also in that, okay, let me just rather put this one separate. It can also come in different, in the form of people, right? Or personnel, so they say. So personnel in the organization would carry specific positions, or personnel in the organization would carry a specific degree of authority. So when you are for instance, inquiring, right? Because obviously when you inquire, you don't inquire with a document, you don't inquire with an asset, you inquire with a person, you inquire from a human being. So be specific with the type of with the person that you are inquiring from, or the person that you are asking questions from. Because inquiring, it's basically asking questions. It's more like interviewing. It's more like it's more of questioning, so to speak, right? So with the what part, guys, it's much on much to do with this. And I want you to observe something. All of this, some of it act as a form of an internal control. For example, documents, it's a form of an internal control. People, personnel, it's a form of an internal control. Then I don't want to limit it also to this, but let me expound it further. It can be a specific control activity. Okay, it can be a specific control activity. I'm just going to try and give some few examples. So it can be authorization that you want to evaluate or that you want to test. It can be segregation of duty that you want to evaluate. It can be supervision that you want to evaluate, if ever it is in existence. It can be physical controls that you want to evaluate. It can be access controls that you want to evaluate whether they are there, It can be document design, that you want to evaluate. So now I want you to observe, if it's a specific control activity, how do I test whether there's authorization? How do I know that there's authorization that has taken place? Now, we think of it in this way. We think of it, okay, in the manual environment, how will I know that there was authorization that took place? That is, if I identify signatures on a document. Are we together? That's how I can confirm if ever there is authorization. Another way, if it's not a signature, obviously, in the computerized environment, how will I know that there's authorization that has been obtained before processing further? That is, if there's a certain pre-requested condition that should be met before the system processes further, it confirms to me that there is authorization if there's something like that. But sometimes it also not limited to authorization. It can also imply perhaps that there's isolation of responsibilities. Why isolation of responsibilities? To ensure accountability. Very important. Then how do I know the segregation of duty? Because all these things, as I'm writing them down, they need to make sense to you guys. Okay. Segregation of duty, it simply means in the same process, all right? If we are dealing with ordering, okay, we need to separate the duties. We need to have at least 4 separate people that are receiving orders from customers. That's segregation of duty. Okay. Guys, we're left with a minute, so we're going to connect again to proceed on this in the next video. That's video B. Thank you, guys. So you just use the same link, okay?
All right.
Thank you so much.